Well, welcome to everybody, and thank you for coming to this, our third panel of our series, Political Revisions. In the last weeks, we have had the privilege to hold lectures here of former Spanish ministers, Jaime Mayor Oreja and Rafael Arias Salgado, dealing with different topics. And these in our third panel, we are going to have a debate with the topic, Brexit, is it the right decision? And well, I'm just going to start with a brief introduction of the topic and then of the debaters. On June 23rd, 2016, well, these are facts that everybody knows, but anyway, I'll introduce the facts. A referendum was held in the United Kingdom regarding its permanence in the European Union. With a very short margin, 51.89% of the population voted to leave the Union, a decision that has been labeled Brexit. This decision has certainly split the country. And finally, tomorrow, March 29th, 2017, Theresa May will trigger the process foreseen in Article 50 of the Treaty of the European Union to leave the Union after 44 years belonging to it. The UK joined the European Union in 1973, as you may know, after two attempts of Charles de Gaulle not to admit them, after two vetoes of Charles de Gaulle. So, and this happens tomorrow. They trigger the process to leave the Union also after four days after the 60th celebration of the Rome Treatises. And for this debate, we have our two distinguished guests, are Dominic Burbidge, who is a lecturer at Oxford University, and Daniel Mullin-Stasek, researcher at the ICS and also a PhD at Oxford University. So let me introduce very briefly our debaters. And Dominic Burbidge, as I say, he got his PhD at Oriel College, Oxford. He has been professor at Strathmore College, at Strathmore Law School in the Strathmore University, Kenya. He has also been postdoctoral research fellow at the James Madison Program in American Ideals and Institutions at Princeton University, where I have the privilege to coincide with him. And now he's a lecturer at Oxford University, where he runs the program for the Foundations of Law and Constitutional Government. He's also a research fellow at Policy Exchange, a think tank where he's conducting his research on trust, local government, decentralization, devolution, and constitutional affairs. In his quality of a member of this think tank, he has advocated for the Brexit. In fact, he wrote an article with the title, before the Brexit, he wrote an article with the title, Why Britons Should Vote to Leave the European Union. So he's going to strongly defend the Brexit. And on the other side, we have Daniel Mullin-Stasek, who is also a PhD at Oxford on education. He has been lecturer at Somerville College, Oxford, at the University of Geneva. He has been a visiting lecturer at the University of Roehampton, and now he's a research fellow at the Institute for Culture and Society. He's also an associate fellow of the University of Warwick Centre for Education Studies. Daniel has a much more sympathetic approach to the European Union, and he's going to defend the position against the Brexit. So in order to organize the debate, what we are going to do is that we'll start with two interventions. They will have the opportunity to develop their views in around 15 minutes. And right after, well, they'll have a reply. First, Dominic, we have agreed that Dominic will start with while defending his position. Then Daniel will defend his position. Then they'll have a reply, each of them. And at the end, we'll open the round for questions from the auditorium. So, Dominic, thank you very much. Well, thank you both very much for coming and for joining us here. And Dominic, you have the word now. You have the microphone.
Thank you very much, Fernando. Why are you here? Are you here to see English people? If you want to see English people, you can go to Granada or Malaga. and you can see them practice their one sentence of Spanish. Una cerveza, por favor. Or maybe you're here because you heard we're university professors and we have status. But no, because in fact this university is filled with university professors, so it can't be that. Maybe you're here hoping we would be very handsome. But no, if you were hoping we were handsome, you would have Google imaged us beforehand, and apart from Daniel, been thoroughly disappointed with what you saw. You must be here because you believe that in the clash of ideas, that through argument and confrontation over the truth, you can improve your understanding. You must be here because of the democratic soul hardwired into you as Europeans. You must be here because you recognize there are problems with the European Union that need to be resolved, and feel that if they are not addressed in a way that meets with our traditions, that meets with that democratic soul that you have, then we will lose everything that we have built in Europe. In her book, The Origins of Totalitarianism, Hannah Arendt writes in Fear that sometimes our conceptions of the way we do politics in Europe can lead to ideological debates that stop progress and solutions and inhibit mechanisms of accountability. She, a Jew, had to flee Nazi Germany, was a student of Heidegger, briefly was in a concentration camp, and escaped to America. When she wrote The Origins of Totalitarianism to give a critique of how Europe had descended into fascism and communism, she feared that any repetition might be possible if there is not direct lines of accountability towards our leaders. My argument today is that you are democratic, but the European Union is not. The European Union is a treaty-based organization which has as its mandate to implement the terms of its treaty regardless of what the people's views are. In your history as a European, you have hardwired ideals of democracy that reign from ancient Greece through the French Revolution, through Britain's Glorious Revolution, and arrive right in this moment of response to the world wars, where you cherish institutions that protect local governance, that uphold civil liberties, and that believe that through mutual exchange between fair-minded individuals, you can come to a consensus of what policies are correct. That is the democratic ideal, and that is an ideal which is being ignored, abused, and destroyed by the European Union. My argument is very simple. There is a democratic deficit within the European Union for which it lacks the structure to resolve internally. To establish that argument, I am just going to go through two examples of problems within the European Union, which I believe show that when there is a systematic problem, there is no debate, there is no democratic process to resolve them, leading to those problems being accentuated until the point when they can cause devastation. The first of these problems is with the principle of subsidiarity and the way local institutions and communities are treated. This is an ongoing problem that has pervaded the European Union throughout, and despite popular rejection of the proposed constitution of the European Union, there has been no capacity within the European Union institutions to resolve that deficit. The second is with the euro, which is an ongoing and impending crisis that is due to expand outside of all proportions that we've hitherto understood. The euro is a time bomb which has allowed, as an excuse, the European Central Bank to expand its powers without any democratic consultation whatsoever. What do I mean by saying I like democracy? Sometimes people think you can measure democracy by political parties, by notions of civil liberty. I think all of these are good. Sometimes people say, oh, democracy is when if enough people don't like it, you can bring it down. And then, of course, those who advocate for the European Union feel that that is going to lead to chaos. If we lose these institutions with an anarchism or a libertarianism or freedom, then of course we'll be back to our original position, back to square one. But let me just give you a small test of what a democracy is. This is not the only test, it's just one way of looking at what a good democracy might be. That if you had a good idea as to how to solve a political problem, a public policy question, there would be a place where you can say that good idea. And if that good idea was thought good by others, it could lead to change and a solution to the problem. I accept that this doesn't always happen, but if it never happens, if institutions are structured in a way that it can't happen, then I would say that is not a democracy. Imagine I have a good idea about a problem that the European Union has. Who do I take it to? If I take it to my national government, then they say, we are not the European Union, but there is a European Union over there, somewhere, and they can take on board your idea. Things that pertain to the European Union are a product of the Treaty on European Union. So institutions set up by that treaty, they will listen to you. So I leave my national government and I go to one of those institutions. Now suppose I go to the European Parliament. Suppose I think, like John Locke, that a democracy depends on a fully functioning legislature, that I believe representatives might be able to listen to a good idea and might be able to implement it and pass a law. The EU Parliament will give me two replies. One is that, well, law is not distinct from administration in the European Union. So we don't really act and implement on what the EU does. That is mainly the realm of bodies that have been created, specialist directives. And then the second response they'll give is, in fact, we can't start legislation here. In fact, all we do is modify legislation that has come from the Commission. When the Commission proposes and drafts, we review, we comment, we debate, and we add on bits that we think will be helpful either to the EU as a whole or to our member states. But we can't start your good idea, I'm sorry. So feeling strange that this, what perturbs to be a legislature, what perturbs to be a democratic institution, in fact can't take up any good idea that any citizen has, I go to the Commission, which can draft new legislation. And the Commission, again, tells me two things. It says, firstly, we are only here to implement the terms of the treaty. If your idea does not already exist in the treaty, it is of no consequence. It is of no use to us in structuring how the EU should operate. And then it says a second thing, that even if one of our commissioners likes your idea, he or she is in breach of their treaty duty to be independent and not concerned with the affairs of any individual member state. They swear an oath of independence for which their role is only to implement the terms of the treaty. So my good idea dies. For me, that's not too much of a problem because most of my good ideas are actually quite bad. But there are some people out there within the EU who have ideas about how to solve some of its structural deficiencies. Unless those ideas are already written into the treaty, the EU is uninterested in implementing. It can work in imagined interpretations into the text of the Treaty on the European Union, which destroys our notion of the rule of law. But in doing so, it would be in breach of its duties. Here are my two examples. That we have within the EU a principle of subsidiarity, which at first I would think is a great thing. I love local government, I love variation, I like schools being able to decide on their ethics, their ethos. I like the freedom of churches and civil society organizations. But in fact, the principle of subsidiarity in the EU goes like this. It says, lower bodies, and first you're like, what's a lower body? Okay, is it one's closer to the ground? Or is it ones which you think are inferior? Is that why you call them lower bodies? And so let's say, okay, no, don't worry. Let me be a lower body. I don't mind you calling me a lower body. I'm a church of 1 billion people, for example, but no, I'll be a lower body. Can I be a lower body here? You can decide affairs according to how you like if they cannot be done more effectively by a higher body. Okay, who decides how we measure effectiveness? The EU decides how we measure effectiveness. So according to the criteria of the EU, if you are effective at doing what the EU wants to do, more effective than we can be centrally, then we respect some local autonomy, some local variation. Otherwise, we have the authority to take control. This democratic deficit within the EU, if you have a good idea, a good suggestion of how we can reinterpret the principle of subsidiarity, maybe you say, let's keep with that, but let's say effectiveness can be something we debate in Parliament, what we count as effective. Let's discuss that in Parliament. Then, of course, the reply will be, that's not the terms of the treaty. The terms of the treaty don't say you can debate what effectiveness means within Parliament. It's Parliament's duty to implement the terms of the treaty. And so there isn't that structural capacity to have any good ideas to solve any of these systematic problems. And the final one is, of course, the euro. The euro suffers from two huge errors. First, that there is no coordination possible between the fiscal decisions of member states and the monetary decisions of the European Central Bank. So taxing and spending on the parts of nation states is out of sync with the interest rate policy of the European Central Bank. That is a systematic problem. We need good ideas. The Treaty of the European Union doesn't allow for good ideas to solve that. And the second is through quantitative easing, that we are trying to solve the economic troubles of the European Union by expanding the money supply electronically in order to buy long-term bonds. This is going to lead to a huge inflationary pressure over the next 15 to 20 years. It's going to damage all of pensions over that period. There is no debate allowed, no debate whatsoever about the effects of quantitative easing. It is destroying the money in your pocket, and according to the treaty, you're not allowed to discuss that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dominic, for your intervention, tackling the problem of democracy and the EU. And now, Daniel will develop his position better than answering. The answers will come later.
Yes, that's right. I'm not going to answer Dominic's excellent speech right now. I'm going to give you some stories, because behind the Brexit vote are many stories, some of them true and some of them false. And I'm going to stick to the true ones. And I would like to begin with some words of thanks, gratitude, and respect. And firstly, to the organizers of this debate. What a wonderful thing that our European brothers, I would say, rather than cousins, have invited two people from the small island to speak in